Because maybe just to go off a detour, I know you talk a lot about this a Stoned Ape Theory, and I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit, maybe just touch upon it and know if you've had different angles of looking at it since you last spoke about it. I know you talked about it on the Joe Rogan podcast, on Fantastic Fungi, the Netflix documentary.
Right.
So has there been, any new angles of how you've looked at this theory since you started talking about it and thinking about it?
Yeah, yes, there have. Not that so much recent. I mean, the Stoned Ape Theory, in part, I mean, if it had an origin, it was in Terence's book "Food of the Gods," which you probably have read, and that was published in 1992, I believe, and that's where he first suggested, and he and I mean, he doesn't deserve total credit for this idea. We kind of evolved this idea together. And I'd been talking to him about the evolutionary significance of psychedelics, before the book was even written.
Yeah.
And he wrote the book and came out with this crazy idea that, evolving primates, possibly millions of years ago, lived in an environment in which mushrooms were present, and they consumed these things, and it essentially helped them to become conscious, helped them to learn language and cognition and the ability to imagination, essentially, the ability to internalize visual information that's meaningful and, have visions, but not simply visions that actually carry gnosis, that carry meaning.
And transcend language as well.
And transcend the language, but also facilitate language in the effort to express these ideas, right? And what's changed in that since he wrote the book are a couple of things. We're actually we plan to organize another symposium on the Stoned Ape Theory sometime this fall. Things are pretty intense right now, but I do think we'll be able to find time. We keep pushing back the time, but I want to do another at least half-day symposium on the Stoned Ape Theory, or whatever we end up calling it, because primarily two things have come to light since the book was published in 1992. One of them is neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And the other one is epigenetics. And neither one of these terms was used in 1992. Nobody was thinking about this. Yeah. But neuroplasticity is important because it shows, and this has been shown for psilocybin, that not only the older thinking used to be that once you had a certain complement of neurons at a certain age, nothing changed. The only thing that happened after that was that you lost neurons, but the brain's basic patterns of connection between neural systems and all that was set for life. That's out the window now. We know that patterns of connectivity can change in response to environmental factors and in response to drugs. And in fact, psilocybin has been shown to increase the internal connectivity of neural networks in the cortex and other parts of the brain. I mean, this is fact.
So in simple terms, would that mean that the brain can actually learn quicker when they're having these experiences? Effectively,
or that it makes the brain. I mean, a reflection of learning is one way to quantify learning is the number of connections, the number of synapses, and the psilocybin and presumably other psychedelics can actually increase the number of neurons and the number of connections. the brain is a connection machine. That's what it is. It evolved for signal transduction, and that's what neurotransmitters do. They facilitate communication between neurons in the brain. So there's that. There is these new discoveries which were not known at that time, because we didn't have the neural imaging tools that we have now, so we couldn't see that. So there's neuroplasticity. The brain can actually respond to environmental influences, and it can complexify as a result of exposure to compounds like psilocybin. So that's one data point. The other piece of data or concept that was not discussed much in 1993 is epigenetics. And epigenetics provides a mechanism for these changes to be effectively inherited, but not over multiple generations, without going through the usual mechanism of mutation and inheritance of mutation, selection against that, and that sort of thing. I mean, epigenetics is a way that these changes that take place could be made to stick, over generations, without actually requiring transmission through the usual way we think of traits being inherited through sexual reproduction and inheritance of mutations. Some are better than others. I mean, that does go on, although it's epigenetics is emerging as at least as important a mechanism of evolutionary change as the conventional way. So these two things make the stoned ape hypothesis more likely rather than less likely. I mean, the stoned ape hypothesis, in my mind, but of course I'm biased, but in my mind, I felt like it was always plausible. Now I think my needle has shifted from plausible to more than likely, because of these two mechanisms that Terence did not consider, because they weren't really known about, or if they were, they weren't talked about much by non-specialists. So that's made a difference, and we know, based on other evidence, we know about 2 million years ago. It took approximately 2 million years for the brain to increase in size and complexity, increase in 3 times in size, and each increment in size is reflected by greater complexity of these networks. So, the earliest hominids back at 2 million years ago lived in an environment that it was much wetter than the desert it is now, talking about northern Africa. It lived, there was more rainfall. It was essentially a tropical environment. And in that environment, there were animals, cattle-like animals, essentially the ancestors of modern cattle, that were in the same area. And if this was a plains dwelling species, not living in the forest, living on the plains, they were hunting those animals. They were, that was probably a major food source. But the dung of the animals is the preferred substrate for the psilocybin mushroom, or Psilocybe cubensis, right? So it is not. It's more than likely that there were mushrooms in this environment at that time. All the other pieces were in place, and you have foraging, hungry primates that are happy to eat anything that looks like it might be edible.
Yeah. Especially if it makes them trip to another planet.
And then once they eat it, accidentally or otherwise, then the lights come on, and it's, oh wow, and they discover this internal landscape, essentially the realm of the imagination, and that I think was the trigger that let us cross the threshold.